In terms of when I mentioned that the pandemic influenced the work of media in terms of disinformation, there were a lot of concerns and dilemmas about what to report and what not to report, especially because of the wideness and the amount of information that was available through social media. Of course, journalists usually use social media as some kind of source of information or some kind of tips, or just in general, even as private persons, they use social media. So they see a lot of different information going around there, and when they see something that sounds and looks important, they want to check that, and often during the last year there were often really false information that led them to at least wasting their time on checking something that everyone is talking about, but that turned out to be false. In terms of the production, also it's worth mentioning that the pandemic forced a lot of journalists to stay at home and work from home. That changed the way that they that they're making their products, so to say. So a lot of journalists they didn't go to do field work. But also working from home made a lot of journalists being stuck to their laptops and stuck to their desks and wherever they used to work, and that had an impact on their also their mental health. That's worth also mentioning. There was also another very important aspect of news production during the pandemic, and that is how much did the global knowledge, how about the pandemic, about coronavirus, the real knowledge, the quality knowledge, how much did it actually translate into the context of local news? I'm not sure that it was on the top level as it could be, because there is a lack of science journalists in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and in general in this region. There is a lack of science journalists. There are just a few in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and that created space for a lot of disinformation and even political news to jump in and take that place. Especially that was the case around the 2020 elections in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and also elections in some other countries in the region. Another thing that I would just briefly mention, a lot of media houses, the media community talked about it a lot, but there were unfortunately not so many solutions to it, and that is drop of resources, drop of advertising revenues in the media, especially in the beginning of the pandemic. That led to some media houses laying off their staff, and the staff that remained working in the media, they were pressured additionally. So at the same time, we had a global increase of interest of audience into what journalists have to say, but at the same time, a lot of media houses had to lay off, or at least they said they had to lay off their staff. So fewer journalists there was more interest in the media content, quality media content, but fewer journalists being able to work freely and in a way that they have all the needed resources for it. So in general, just to sum up, restricted information to journalists about COVID, the pandemic, lack of responses to FOIA requests were also a problem, because a lot of institutions weren't working, staff of the institutions weren't working, so they were that was the excuse this time to not respond to FOIA requests, for example. And also there were restricted access to press conferences to many reporters, and journalists' work rights were violated, and a lot of media, as I said, had to lay off their staff. Well, I would say that we already know we had deep problems in media sector, but now we are even more sure what are those problems, and not just we in the media community. I believe that also citizens, the wider audience, I believe that they are seeing the true value of quality media, and why am I saying this? Because when the pandemic started, when nobody knew what was happening, everyone turned on their TVs, for example, even people who are not watching TV regularly. And that's just one example that paints the importance of not just traditional media, but in general professional media, because it's not the same to just scroll your whatever social network app you're using and scroll your whatever website you're using to follow news, and to use multiple media sources like radio, television, and this all even newspaper, and people. I think that people were coming back to these even traditional quality media to check what do they have to say, what are they reporting, what is the flow of information, who said what, where, not just, people weren't just scrolling their news apps on their phones. They were trying to follow information on multiple platforms, multiple media. So I believe that this is just one example that is showing that people are recognizing that quality media are important. And this is the first thing that comes to my mind when you ask me what did the pandemic change in sense of people understanding the media, what did it change in general for the media sector. Yes, I agree that also at the same time, while we are understanding the enhanced need for more quality media, we're also seeing the holes, we are also seeing the flaws, even more obviously than before. So as I said, there's a lack of science journalists, but there's also a lack of journalists who can cover serious topics like this one. There isn't just lack of science journalists. There's a lack of journalists who understand deeply international relations and the economics behind this, and different scientific and health topics. So there is an increased need for education of journalists in all these sectors. And even when you look at the media reporting, daily media reporting, you see that we see that usually there's a need for even basic education of journalists into reporting about facts, about quoting, ethical reporting, and different aspects of regular daily media work. And with the pandemic, with all the problems that we saw in the last year, we are just seeing more clearly that we need more education into specific areas of journalism, into specific reporting skills of journalists. Well, there had been calls for some time now for some kind of regulation of internet. You can hear a random person on the street talking about the need to regulate the internet, and tech platforms, for example, they have their rules. For instance, on hate speech, and recently also over the spread of disinformation around COVID and vaccines, which function well, I guess, in like more or less they are active, and I believe that there should be more discussion about this, because especially in the region like this one, the post-communist region, where the different aspects of freedoms are not developed to the best point. Talking about any kind of regulation is double-ended sword here. Even though when you hear a random person on the street talking about need for regulation, they maybe mean well, but they are not aware of misuse of such regulation. But to take it to look at it globally, as I said, there have been for some time now calls for regulation of the internet in many aspects, and but I think that there should be more discussion about this. It's easy to impose some regulation, and I believe it's going to be a process, a very long process. And tech platforms, they definitely have a lot of responsibilities around the spread of disinformation, because they are platforms, they are not just tools. And because they are platforms, I believe that they should and have responsibility and even more than they're doing now, and do even more than they're doing now. Why am I saying that there should be a bit more discussion about what is restricted, for example, on social networks, and what is not restricted? There have been some moves by the tech platforms to ban somebody, to remove some contents that is spreading disinformation around COVID and vaccines and so on. But I'm just maybe for a second trying to think as a person. I'm trying to imagine a person who is highly engaged into kind of trying to open the eyes of people, the person who is spreading disinformation, who is spreading different confusing theories, who thinks this all is one big lie. And when that kind of person is, let's say, suspended from social media, or their content is removed, contents that is saying that COVID is a big lie and so on, that person can think that it's another proof of the big lie, and that's why I think that there should be more discussion about the pros and cons and the rules, and even some kind of educational campaign from the side of these tech platforms. Their rules are over there, and sometimes they seem complicated for a normal person to get to know them. Well, first of all, what's changed in the media reporting during last year and around the elections, the pre-election campaign, is that there weren't any public, or at least in the majority of cases, there weren't public gatherings that the media would usually cover and report as part of their reporting in pre-election campaign. And that's one thing. Another thing that changed, and another thing that changed is that there were a lot of content that the political parties themselves produced as their advertising material, and they published that on social media rather than usually more on traditional media. So I believe that, of course, this trend of using social media in pre-election campaign globally, especially in the West, is nothing new. It started to become something new a couple of years ago here in the region, but the pandemic and the lack of gatherings, the physical gatherings, only emphasized that and only kind of sped it up in a way. What remained the same when we talk about media reporting, media and the elections and the relation to political parties, one thing I would say in general stayed the same, and that is the political dependence of media to political parties and the institutions in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in a way that a big chunk of financing of media, regular financing of media, comes from institutions through people who are from political parties. And that is this very constant influence that political parties have over media, and nothing could break that, not even the financial, economic crisis that was caused by the pandemic. Also, another thing to mention here when we are talking about financial dependability of media from institutions or political parties indirectly, is that during 2020 all these budgets were already planned and also were kind of boosted because of the elections, boosted even before the pandemic, and most of them remained the same. They didn't change. They weren't reshifting of budgets during the year in terms of canceling media contracts and tenders and things like that, because they needed media because of the elections. The question is what happens in 2021, what happens in 2022, and what happens in general. I believe that I'm not sure that this would decrease, this kind of influence over media would decrease or drop significantly over the coming years, because it's a very powerful tool for political parties and for those who are in power to have media in their hands. And they're not paying the media from their own pockets. They're paying them from state budgets, from the money, from the cash of citizens. So that remained the same during the last year. In general, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, not so much. I would say there weren't so many cases of politicians using any kind of, let's say, COVID-related conspiracy theories to win or lose elections, or accuse their opponents of anything. Unfortunately, the past elections were another round of elections, local elections, that were so much less about local issues than everything else, So no matter what kind of elections do we have in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's all about national rhetorics, nationalistic ethnopolitics, and things like that. And there weren't that much discussions about how to deal with the pandemic, how to deal with COVID. There were some discussions about the impact on economy, the impact on loss of jobs and issues like that. But in general, I wouldn't say that the disinformation around coronavirus was a major issue in winning or losing the election and the campaigns.